Today's stories. UN Human Rights Committee tells Australia to change its migration laws. The United Nations says Syria's eastern Ghouta faces complete catastrophe. South Korea's moon unveils new focus on Southeast Asia. Mattis is looking at ways to bring Russia into compliance with the Arms Control Treaty. U.S. movement We Are Still In seeks to show many in the United States are still committed to the Paris Climate Pact. Boeing 747 airliner bids farewell over U.S. skies. Plus, DC Forum previews Philippines and U.S. priorities for ASEAN 2017. Hello everyone, I am Eliza Gonzalez Manlikmot, bringing you stories from around the globe, and this is Eagle News, Washington, D.C. The UN Human Rights Committee said in a report on Thursday, Australia needs to stop rejecting refugees and change its migration laws to come into line with international standards. The committee, which comprises 18 independent experts and monitors countries' compliance with the Global Human Rights Treaty, said Australia should come back in 1 year to explain what action it had taken to meet its concerns. Australia has been widely criticized by the United Nations and rights groups for detaining asylum seekers who try to reach its shores by boat, even if they are found to be refugees, and keeping them on offshore processing centers in Nauru and Papua New Guinea.
What they cannot do is that they cannot treat asylum seekers as criminals and detain them, and they cannot absolve themselves of their duty not to send them back to danger. So we are actually, the standard that we are setting, we think is a standard which is quite minimalistic, and that we expect most countries in the world, certainly countries that assume a leadership position in the world of human rights, such as Australia, that was just elected to the Human Rights Council, to embrace these standards.
The center-right government and the labor opposition back the offshore detention policies. The United Nations has warned of a looming humanitarian crisis in the Manus Island Center in Papua New Guinea. It was closed on October 31st, but 600 asylum seekers have refused to leave, fearing violent reprisals from islanders if they move to transit centers, pending possible resettlement to the United States. The committee said Australia's 1958 Migration Act allows removal of an unlawful non-citizen regardless of the risk of returning them to a country where they may face death or persecution, ignoring the principle of not sending refugees back to danger, known as non-refoulement. It urged Australia to ensure the principle was secured in law and adhered to.
And we call on Australia to, in paragraph 36 of the report, to end its offshore transfer arrangements, and to arrange for following the closure of these processing centers, to ensure that the individuals held there are transferred to Australia or relocated to other appropriate safe country, and to monitor the situation after closure of the center. So this was certainly a strong concern for the committee.
The committee was concerned about conditions in Manus Island and in Nauru, citing serious safety concerns and instances of assault, sexual abuse, self-harm, and suspicious deaths. UN humanitarian advisor John Egeland said on Thursday the 400,000 civilians besieged in the Syrian enclave of eastern Ghouta face complete catastrophe because aid deliveries are blocked and hundreds of people need urgent medical evacuation.
So there is an accumulated number now of around 400 men, women and children. I would estimate maybe 3/4 of them women and children that need to be evacuated now. We have confirmation of 7 patients dead because they were not evacuated, some of these children.
Egeland said UN aid convoys, which would be the only lifeline, have not been given permission to enter eastern Ghouta, which had been sealed off since September.
Of course, we cannot continue like that. If we get only in a fraction of what is needed, it will be a complete catastrophe.
Egeland said there were a growing number of acutely malnourished children, which meant they were very close to dying. South Korean President Moon Jae-in on Thursday unveiled a new policy aimed at deepening ties with Southeast Asia as the North Asian economic powerhouse seeks to curb its reliance on traditional trading partners like China and the United States. Moon held talks with Indonesian President Joko Widodo at a state palace in Bogor, south of Jakarta, and discussed infrastructure, trade, and also tension on the Korean peninsula.
Dan kita menekankan posisi Indonesia yang mendesak agar Korea Utara mematuhi semua resolusi Dewan Keamanan PBB terkait dengan denuklerisasi Semenanjung Korea dan menghentikan uji coba peluncuran balistik misil.
Moon said South Korea aims to boost trade with Indonesia to $30 billion by 2022 and eventually to more than $50 billion.
넷째, 우리 두 정상은 영내 및 글로벌 차원의 평화와 안정에 기여하기 위해 더욱 긴밀히 협력해 나가기로 하였습니다. 특히 저는 조코이 대통령께 우리의 대아세안 관계 강화 정책이 잘 구현될 수 있도록 인도네시아가 적극 성원해 줄 것을 요청하였고, 조코이 대통령은 우리의 아세안 관계 강화 비전에 지지를 보내주셨습니다.
The new Southern policy aims to better connect South Korea to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, grouping and expanding the economic influence of Asia's fourth largest economy in the region, home to more than 500 million people. Moon is set to attend APEC meeting in Vietnam on November 10 and ASEAN summit in the Philippines, where he is expected to hold talks with leaders from the 10-nation regional bloc. Coming up, Mattis is looking at ways to bring Russia into compliance with the Arms Control Treaty. U.S. movement We Are Still In seeks to show many in the United States are still committed to the Paris Climate Pact. Boeing 747 airliner bids farewell over U.S. skies. Plus, D.C. Forum previews Philippines and U.S. priorities for ASEAN 2017. Eagle News, Washington, D.C. will return in a moment. Welcome back. This is Eagle News, Washington, D.C. U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said on Thursday he had discussed Russia's violation of an arms control treaty with his NATO counterparts, and they were looking at how to bring Moscow into compliance with it. U.S. officials have said Russia has deployed a cruise missile despite complaints by Washington that it violates the Arms Control Treaty, banning ground-based U.S. and Russian intermediate-range missiles.
The discussion included a consideration of the Russian Federation's violations of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty and our collective efforts to bring Russia back into a compliance with the INF. This is absolutely necessary to sustain confidence in arms control agreements, and we're doing so in a substantial, transparent, and verifiable fashion.
Russia, however, has said in the past that it appears that Washington, now in the midst of a $1 trillion, 30-year modernization of its aging ballistic missile submarines, bombers, and land-based missiles, was in breach of the same treaty. The alliance's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said on Thursday NATO defense ministers also discussed increasing training and support activities in Iraq, the second of a two-day meeting in Brussels.
We have a core team in place. It arrived in Baghdad in January, and we have started different training activities with the Iraqi forces on countering IEDs, or improvised explosive devices, on maintenance of equipment, on military medicine, and we also help them with modernizing their security and defense institutions. Many allies argued during the meeting today and yesterday, during the meeting yesterday, in favor of stepping up and increasing those training and capacity building activities.
The support and training activities to the Iraqi military consist in countering improvised explosive devices and civil-military cooperation. A United States coalition ranging from cities to companies sought to persuade other nations on Thursday that large swathes of the United States remain committed to the Paris Climate Accord despite plans by U.S. President Donald Trump to pull out. The We Are Still In coalition opened a 2,500 square meter pavilion just outside halls for a UN climate meeting of 200 nations in Bonn, where the U.S. government delegation has a space of just 100 square meters. Trump, who doubts mainstream scientific findings that global warming is primarily caused by man-made greenhouse gases, said in June that he will pull out of the 2015 Paris Agreement and instead promote the domestic U.S. coal and oil industries. The We Are Still In coalition, including states, cities, universities, faith groups, and environmental activists, aims to show delegates at the November 6 to 17 UN talks that many Americans support the Paris goal of ending the fossil fuel era this century.
Well, I think one of the messages that we're trying to send is that the real America is committed to climate action, and that Trump and his rejection of Paris and his rejection of the climate science and the need for action is a temporary aberration in U.S. policy. It's not a long-term trend. We're trying to tell other countries, business leaders, others around the world that the United States will be a reliable partner and that the next president, whoever she is, or him, will bring the United States back into the fold on Paris.
The Boeing 747 airliner, with her unique design and unmistakable silhouette that once represented the state-of-the-art in air travel, bids farewell over U.S. skies. Ron Hamilton with the story.
Queen of the sky, jumbo jet, freedom bird. Call it what you will, the Boeing 747 has ruled the skies for almost 50 years. But today marks another important chapter in her long history, as she just finished flying from San Francisco to Honolulu, her final commercial flight in the United States. Since her debut in 1968, the Boeing 747 has been in high demand by the world's leading airlines. In July 1970, United Airlines flew its first 747, also from San Francisco to Honolulu. For a farewell fit for the Queen of the Skies, passengers and crew alike celebrated with a throwback by wearing 1970s fashion, while being treated with Hawaiian cuisine along with some music from decades past. Upon arrival, everyone on board was greeted with the traditional floral lei, Hawaiian music, some desserts, and a lot of aloha. The aircraft received a royal welcome herself with a gigantic lei that was draped on her fuselage. Among those who greeted the crew and passengers was Hawaii Governor David Ige.
It was the mainstay of the airline industry for such a long time. It certainly was the very first United 747 flight was San Francisco to Hawaii, so it's really fitting that the last ends up being San Francisco to Hawaii. So the 747 revolutionized air travel. It's the first wide-body plane, the double-decker. It truly challenged anything that ever was built before that. It was 2.5 times bigger than the existing airlines that were traveling. It truly changed the economics. It made it more affordable for families to be able to travel. So it certainly was a part of Hawaii's growth and expansion in as an international destination.
Flight attendants, like Denise, felt sad about seeing the 747 retire, but also swelled with pride about having served in this historic flight. United Airlines is the latest in the airline industry to have retired the jumbo jet from its fleet, opting for newer and more fuel-efficient aircraft. Meanwhile, Delta Airlines continues to use the 747 in its international flights, but it's also slated to retire the jumbo jet later this year. Reporting from Honolulu, Hawaii, this is Ron Hamilton for Eagle News. I am one with 25.
DC Forum previews Philippines and U.S. priorities for ASEAN 2017. That's next. Eagle News Washington, D.C. will return shortly. This is Eagle News, Washington, D.C. I am Eliza Gonzalez Manglekmot. Philippine Embassy charged the Affairs ad interim Minister Patrick Chua Soto and United States Deputy Assistant Secretary of State W. Patrick Murphy spoke at a forum, a preview of U.S. and Philippine priorities for the 2017 ASEAN and East Asia Summits at the Stimson Center here in Washington, D.C. More than 100 guests from U.S. government agencies, think tanks, business groups, private sector, and diplomatic corps attended a discussion on U.S. and Philippine priorities, U.S.-ASEAN partnership, and the Philippines' role as ASEAN chair this year. Murphy highlighted U.S. President Donald Trump's priorities in his ASEAN trip, including the nuclearization of North Korea, meaningful code of conduct negotiations in the South China Sea, and counterterrorism efforts. Chua Soto laid out the Philippines' thematic priorities as chair of ASEAN 2017, discussing the ASEAN goals of building an inclusive ASEAN community, upholding peaceful coexistence among member states, and adhering to the rule of law and the peaceful resolution of disputes. Chua Soto also discussed sustaining inclusive economic growth, enhancing resiliency when faced by natural calamities, and strengthening its ASEAN institutions. That is today's Eagle News Washington, D.C. Join us next week as we bring stories that matter to you. Visit our website at Eaglenews.PH. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/EagleNewsPH. Thank you for watching. I am Eliza Gonzalez Manglekmot, always one with 25. Happy weekend.